6 hunger strikers have starved themselves to death over the past 3 months, and 2 more will probably die this week.
Margaret Thatcher made a horrific mistake in the hunger strike.
The Loyalist paramilitaries were aware that the Republicans were gaining a political edge.
That was self-sacrifice, those guys. You know, it's a bad death. I know about death, so, you know, systematically starving yourself to death is a terrible way to go. But they believed in what they were doing, so yes, Republicans sort of grabbed the limelight.
In the maze, Loyalist prisoners could only look on.
If one faction embarked on a particular form of protest, then the other one couldn't engage in it, because that would be seen as supporting the other.
Propaganda-wise, Loyalists within the prison, they were nowhere. They were light years behind.
The propaganda value of the strike had peaked, but the strikers felt that to call it off now would be a betrayal of the men who died. Faced with this deadlock, Father Fole defied the hunger strikers by calling their families to a meeting.
I explained simply that Mrs. Thatcher was going to let them die. There's no doubt about that, you know. At that stage, 6 people had died, and the protest had got worldwide publicity, but that was now dying away, and that it was time to reconsider the thing and request that it should be ended.
In a parallel meeting, Jerry Adams, ex-prisoner and now leader of Sinn Féin, went to the maze to speak to the hunger strikers.
And he came in. I couldn't really see him anyway, the eyes was gone. But Tom McGree, he took charge of the meeting. Jerry told us, says, any of us want to come off this hunger strike can come off it right now. And he says, Paddy, it started you first. He says, you seem to be the worst. They asked me, I said no. And then he went around the rest of them. Everybody said no.
Kieran Doherty says, when that man there comes and tells me we've had the 5 demands, I'll end my hunger strike. Responsibility's with Maggie Thatcher, not with me.
I knew I was going to die, accepted it, and I was really, really happy with that decision.
But when Paddy Quinn fell into a coma, his mother stepped in and requested medical intervention.
Well, I just wanted to save my son's life.
And what condition was he in when you took this decision?
Well, he was unconscious.
I remember I was angry, you know, angry at myself and my mother, you know, for taking me off it.
I think he never should have went on the hunger strike. He wasn't fit for it.
Did you feel you'd failed?
I did to a certain extent as well, you know.
The hunger strike had been fatally undermined, but some still held out. As an Irish Republican named Mickey Devine approached death, his sister made a final visit.
The saddest part in all my life was when I had to take them 2 children and to say goodbye to their daddy. And the children were scared, I was scared, and he was scared. It was near the end then. But at that precise time he was blind, so I had to sit them up in the bed and tell him who was who. This is Michael, this is Louise, while he felt round for their face and hair.
On the 20th of August, Mickey Devine became the 10th man to starve himself to death.
When Bobby Sands died, there was 500,000 people at his funeral, and it hit the headlines of the whole world. When poor Mickey Devine died on the 20th of August, he only got small bits in the newspapers. But I think the provisionals knew themselves that the time had come, but they couldn't stop it. They'd lose too much political face by stopping it. It was good to have a scapegoat like myself came along and made a fool of myself, I suppose, and helped the relatives to bring it to an end.
When the surviving hunger strikers' families announced that they would request medical intervention to prevent any more deaths, the strike collapsed. On the 3rd of October 1981, after 98 days, it was all over. 10 men had died in a failed attempt to win concessions on prison conditions. But their long drawn-out deaths had consequences that went beyond the prison walls. The IRA had its first MP at Westminster, politics now joined violence in the Republican armory. The maze had given republicanism new martyrs and a new direction. By 1983, most of the protesters' demands had been quietly conceded. This new, more relaxed regime was intended to remove the maze as a source of political friction.
Duty officer in the Northern Ireland office got the word every night that the maze is quiet. There's no trouble in the maze. Brilliant.
But the reality was very different. Under the leadership of Bick McFarlane, the IRA had simply changed tactics.
We began to look at avenues where we could get out of the place. We realised that it was labelled as Europe's biggest and most secure prison. We needed to look at certain members of staff who would be in key positions and suss out the psychology of the individual. I mean, I would engage in conversation with them every day of the week to build up a profile on them.
We had prisoners, used to come up beside you and they would try and get you into conversation. You maybe have a Volkswagen keyring. They would come up and notice, oh, I see you driving a Volkswagen. What do you think of them and all that?
In building up the profile, what you're doing is trying to understand the person and to see what way he'll react. And particularly, if you want the key that he has to the front gate, is he going to give it? Or are you going to have to wrestle with him? Are you going to have to fight him? Are you going to have to stick a gun on his face?
By the 25th of September 1983, they had the information they needed. They also had 5 handguns, which had been smuggled into the prison.
There was a buzz, there was a tension in the air. I had gone round all the key points to be taken during the course of the morning, found out which guards were on which areas. So at about 20 or 2:45, everybody had moved into position. The lorry arrived, the food lorry. The driver and the helper were secured and brought in. He was threatened with a weapon and was told that Jerry Kelly would be sitting in the cab with him, dressed as a screw. Nobody had any compunction about taking whatever action was necessary in a fight to get out that front gate. When the fight started, batons were drawn and chisels were drawn.
The officer in the control room pulled an alarm button and he was shot in the head.
Everybody got out of the back of the lorry and it was hand-to-hand fighting at that period. It was mayhem.
The staff, barehanded, without any weapons, took these prisoners on.
Some prisoners had knives or chisels.
Jimmy Ferris, he got stabbed in the chest with a chisel supplied by the prison service. Screwdrivers, chisels, hammers, mallets, you name it.
Bobby Story just shot it out the gate, straight out, and everybody just made their way out onto the road. And there were a few cars there that were hijacked, and then we drove off in all sorts of different directions, heading for the border.
Last evening's escape was the biggest ever in the history of the British King.
Sinn Féin said today that there was jubilation in nationalist areas because of the escape.
1 prison officer died. 38 prisoners escaped, including Bick McFarlane, who remained on the run for 3 years. Although 19 were quickly recaptured, the escape was a propaganda triumph. The official report into the escape pins much of the blame on complacency among prison staff, who had felt they had been made into scapegoats.
There's a lot of people turned to their ultimate suicide. Just sitting here thinking, I could probably name you about 15 members of staff off the top of my head.
29 prison staff were killed. Most of the officers serving here were Protestant. They grew up in the same streets as the loyalist gunmen imprisoned in the maze. But the 2 groups gave each other little ground. Michael Stone was a hitman who had already murdered 3 people in the name of the loyalist cause. In the Milltown Cemetery, he attacked an IRA funeral procession, killing 3 more. He received 6 life sentences. In the maze, he was given a hero's welcome.
Big roar went up and prisoners welcomed me on the wing. I was carried down the wing and paraded up and down.
Stone was an icon to Protestant paramilitaries and to the increasingly volatile loyalists inside the prison.
At that stage, the loyalists were causing the most problems in the prison service. As a prison officer, I lost more close friends to loyalist terrorists than I did to Republican terrorists.